Welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts lecture series hosted here in the Hall of Philosophy by the Pennsylvania Chautauqua organization. It's always an honor to be in this building and feel that connection to the Chautauqua tradition. I want to thank Stinson Strout for sponsoring this lecture series this summer, and also for the funding from the Mount Gretna Arts Council and Purpose One Visual Marketing. I'm going to introduce Kurt Moyer, who drove down from Rochester. He's spent his undergraduate years at Kutztown University and worked in their department for a little while after college, and then has been showing at the Grossman Fleet Gallery in Philadelphia, and just recently had a pretty cool show in February. Yeah. So I'm going to pass this over to Kurt.
Thank you very much for coming out this evening. So I put together a little PowerPoint presentation, a general overview of my work. But for the past, say, 5 years or so, things have been changing kind of radically. I've been moving towards more abstraction. And so I thought for this lecture, particularly for the students who are here, I talk a little bit about how I got to where I am, and I don't want to, present any illusions that I actually know where I am, but it's a process, and here I am. So first, I think I should start by saying my concept of natural reality, at least the way I'm going to talk about in this lecture, is the perceived reality that I see and that a lot of us see in nature. So when I think about a painting that exhibits natural reality, it's going to be a very traditional landscape painting. An abstract reality is the kind of painting that we approach and we see first for its physical terms, for its color, its texture, its shapes, things like that. And sort of the meaning and connection to nature usually comes second. So I'm going to start by showing a few slides. Again, like Jay said, I went to Kutztown in Pennsylvania, and I was very fortunate to meet a man there named George Sorrells, who was just a wonderful encyclopedic kind of knowledge of art making in general, but he really turned me on to plein air painting. When I first got started, I couldn't get enough. I was spending every day that I could out in the landscape trying to copy what I saw. And this is a view from a good friend, Penny's Hill. And the environment around Kutztown has this kind of lovely landscape, but it's particularly was special to me because of this atmospheric color that was available there. And there's another one. I'm going to move kind of quickly through some of these. There are literally thousands of them. I couldn't, like I said, it was a daily practice. I'm not showing you thousands, I promise. It was a daily practice for me that was essentially felt like the core of my education at Kutztown. George really helped kind of nudge me in certain directions, and opened me up to artists as they became important. But what quickly happened is I wanted to do something more with these small plein air paintings I was making. I wanted to make something a little bit more substantial out of it. So I started bringing them into the studio and making larger paintings that I felt like had more of a life of their own. And in some ways, I think this is where I really started exploring painting, where the painting itself had a sort of a mystery, where I thought, that it could reveal something to me that I didn't actually bring to it, that it was almost like an alchemy of sorts, where I was bringing these certain materials together, and there was a magic that happened when these things came together. One artist that was really important to me at the time was the painter Balthus. He's a little bit of a controversial guy, but he had a core devotion to painting that I found very attractive. And I also found very attractive the way he structured his paintings. So these paintings, you can notice in this one, there's nothing haphazard about the placement of anything in this painting. There's a real geometric logic that goes into the way these paintings are constructed. There's a texture and kind of a mystery about every one of these paintings that I found very compelling, and it influenced my work heavily. This is one of my paintings of the same time, and I think you can see the kind of immediate influence there. I was living in Virginville, Pennsylvania, and had found a really fabulous studio there. And so right out of undergraduate school, I was painting every day. I had already met my wife, who's here in this picture. And I really didn't feel like I felt like I was doing what I wanted to do already. So I never pursued a graduate degree beyond that. And it's been good. I've been painting every day since. So here we are. This same process I'm condensing into a few slides here, but this is many years of looking, searching for subjects, and then bringing them back into the studio to try to make something more substantial. So the previous slide is a collection of small beach paintings that I made on site in Cape May, like sitting on that weird guy sitting on the beach making paintings was me, you know. And then I would bring those resources back into the studio and carefully construct something out of them that felt to me maybe to even be somewhat more than the sum of its parts. You know, that it had hopefully a kind of a balance and a interest beyond itself. There are outliers. I was saying to Bruce earlier that occasionally throughout, you know, I've been at this what feels like a short amount of time, but really it's been probably 25 years of painting every day. And throughout that process, throughout that time frame, some things have popped up that I didn't really understand. I made them at the time, and they were sort of blips, something I moved beyond. My wife and I always talk about these as the butterfly series paintings because they all had this screen of yellow butterflies in front of them. It started with an idea one day where I actually was cutting and taping some butterflies onto the surface of the painting. And what this was doing for me at the time was kind of delineating where that surface was. All the paintings I've showed you up to this point and beyond as we move forward are really illusionistic paintings, right? There's nothing that appears to be on the surface. Everything is this sort of illusion of a window that you look into. The butterflies, you notice they're basically all the same size. There's not a lot of modeling. They're not meant to look real. They're really meant to look like they are a screen that you look through. But then I moved on from it. And I didn't know what to do with it. So this is going to be a theme that you'll see periodically where I kind of discover something, whether it's small or large, I don't really know. And then I go back to what I know and where I feel comfortable and start thinking through that process again. So there's this sort of 3 or 4 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing about this whole past 20 some years of my life. In 2008, we moved to Rochester, New York. It was probably the biggest change in landscape, environment, and life that I experienced. But it opened up some new paths, met some wonderful new painters, and some new landscapes. So this is Highland Park. One of the things I was doing at this time was really very carefully studying and recognizing how important to me it was to find this color in the shadows and how the color changed as it went back in space. This sounds very small, like a small thing, but at the time, it was sort of like me putting my finger on the thing that mattered to me about making these paintings, was the way that I saw that phenomena of the color changing as it moved through atmospheric space. Around the same time, I met a very dear friend. He happened to have a studio across the hall from me. He's a painter, but really a sculptor named Jason Tennant. And he invited me to build a small cabin on his land. It was probably one of the most generous offers anybody's made. And I was really hesitant first. I just met this guy, you know. And when my wife was pregnant with our daughter, I just thought it was kind of now or never. And I include this slide here of the cabin. It's just a small thing. But the process of making it really felt a lot like making my paintings. It felt like the first step in making the paintings that were to come out of this place. What you don't see is this is the view from the cabin. There's a nice pond there. And for a few years, I would go down to the cabin, work during the day, and come back. Like any chance that I got to get down there and paint. I really started zeroing in on this little corner of the pond that has had some pretty exciting light things happening, where the light was cutting through the water, but then also reflecting the sky, reflecting the trees. It was this kind of wonderfully complex, Monet-ish landscape that I could work from. And what was wonderful at this time was to have the cabin act as almost like my easel. I could store the paintings there, and I could work on a larger scale, and it made the connection to the larger paintings much more direct. So whereas before I was using a much more traditional approach where I would go out and make these small landscape paintings and bring them back in the studio, and everything would get digested and turned into a bigger painting. Here, I was able to go kind of directly to the source and make paintings that were a slightly larger scale right on site. These are all about 4 feet square. So a whole series of them here. So that experience of working larger scale on site, completing the paintings in that environment, that really direct one-to-one relationship environment, was something that I started working to incorporate into the rest of my painting practice. So at home, I have a small patch of woods, and I built this really cool little painting cart, and it allows me to work on something that's up to 48 inches high, right on site. And so I can kind of wheel around the yard and work very directly that way. This is the painting that came from one of those experiences. What's sort of funny, maybe you don't know this, but there's like 10 years between this photo and this painting. Some trees have fallen down. So still the experience of perceptual color and working to capture that in a way that felt very immediate and direct to me was the most important driver for this period. A better way to talk about that, I think, is the connection that it makes. There's something about plein air painting that is so direct. You get this kind of one-to-one relationship with the experience of looking and the object of art making. And that was something that I still treasure. And it's that sort of connection to the experience that I've realized I want to keep with me as I go. So what I wound up doing is looking for places around me that I could return to again and again. And they were places that had a particular importance to me personally, but also they were beautiful and structured in such a way but the color was complex and interesting. So in upstate New York, we have these they call gullies, but they're just these deep caverns that were cut from water in the creeks. And then you have very flat stones, and you get this kind of wonderful experience of walking like straight up through the creeks. And this is a place that I was able to go back to again and again, very reliably finding the kind of color that I needed for my paintings. And I bring this point up particularly for the students because I think it's really important. Like I saw people today, like looking for subjects, and I think once you've found one, once you've found a place, it can be like your, Cézanne's Mont Saint Victoire, or there's any number of his apples, or Monet's Water Lilies, or whatever. They're inexhaustible in how much these places have to provide for us. So this gully is one of them for me. Unfortunately, I can't find one any close to my house. It's like almost 45 minutes to get there. At home, I have, again, this little patch of woods that I think I have probably squeezed every painting out of that I can get, but it's still, every day that's so different. I can still keep going back there. So there's an old apple tree in the forest here, and this is it in bloom in the springtime. When I was growing up, I grew up in Pottstown area near St. Peter's Village. And I went to Owen J. Roberts High School. They had a really great art department, which is rare. And one of the things that we did as art students and art club members is we went to the Barnes Foundation. And it was the Barnes Foundation before it moved to Philadelphia. And Dr. Barnes created this amazing collection of French Impressionism and Post-Impressionist paintings. And at the time, it was really only open to students to come and study. And we would go there on field trips. And the museum was basically empty. And I had no idea that it was special at all. It was just, I think what it was is it was a small museum, and our teachers could take us there, and we weren't going to get lost in the big city. It wasn't going to be hard to drive to. It had all these things that they wanted. But for me, when I look back on that experience now, one of the things that I realized came out of it for me is that I always thought when I was in high school going to college that people made landscape paintings, still life paintings, portraits, and bathers. Like that this was that this was way more common than it really is. And my parents weren't artists, but they were very supportive and sent me when I was in high school to do drawing classes down in Philadelphia at the Moyer College of Art. But then also like other art classes. So I had this exposure to the nude and the figure in art from a very early age. And so when I started making these landscapes, it seemed really natural to me to try the figure as well. And I was really attracted to the subject in so many ways. The nude figure in nature is such a sensual subject to work with. It's a charged subject. It's not as benign as the landscape can be sometimes. And it was a little more exciting. One of the challenges of putting together a slideshow of your work is a lot of my paintings, a lot of the things I'm showing you overlap in chronology. They make sense when I talk about them as a series and a slide. But if you were to come to my studio at any point during these, you would see all sorts of different things going on. It's only later that it gets filtered into an order that makes sense. So there's what I'm going to show you here is a series of paintings of the Bather paintings. And if I don't want to give you the impression that I started making bathers one day and then that's all I did and I stopped. This is a period that probably stretched more than 20 years. So I did a lot of figure study, and every once a week or so I would go to figure study groups and really try to learn how to paint from the model. And then just like I was doing with the smaller landscapes, and then bringing them back to the studio and making something a little bit more substantial, I was doing the same thing by gathering poses from these figure study groups and bringing them home and making these compositions in the bather paintings. One of the challenges with doing that is making it look natural. You see often painters who are doing that, and the figures look like they're sort of cut and pasted into a landscape, and these things don't fit. One of the ways that I tried to overcome this is I taught a outdoor figure study class where I invited a model to come and pose outdoors. This is Catherine 3 times. But what that does is it gives us the opportunity to again see that natural reality, that phenomenon of the way the color changes on skin, or in these ambient locations. One of the things that I picked up from Cezanne that I honestly I think I really sort of was never able to achieve is the way that one of the things I wanted, I should say, from Cezanne is I really admired the way his bathers never looked like they belonged anywhere outside of his paintings. You know what I mean by that? His figures didn't exist. They didn't like put their clothes back on and go to a job somewhere. They lived inside of that painting. And so when we look at those paintings, we really approach them on many levels at once. One of the things that we generally don't do, and I think where people fail, is when they try to read a narrative into those paintings, to try to figure out, why are all these figures here? Why are they new? What are they doing? What kind of a weirdo is Cezanne or whatever. And I think that really defeats the purpose of the painting. So just like Cezanne did, I would take the same poses, the same figures that I was getting from these figure drawing classes and use them again and again, and let the painting grow. If you look at a book of Cezanne of bathers, in fact, there's a book called The Bathers, and in the back there's a chart. Some art historian has made a chart of all the times that this particular pose has appeared in all these different Cezanne paintings, and some of them appear 30 or 40 times. So you'll see a repeat of this horizontal figure and actually the other 3 throughout the series of bather painting. The 2 kind of culminating paintings that came out of this experience was probably this one, and then all along this process for maybe 10 years or so, this painting was in my studio on the wall, back and forth. So occasionally what will happen, this goes to my comment of the chronology before, there'll be a project that started with no timeline. I don't have a deadline to finish this. It can go on for 10 years if it needs to. And this is a painting that did just that. It changed along with where I was at the time of making these bathers. I think it's about 72 inches across, and it's now has so much paint on it I can hardly pick it up. But it's in a crate now somewhere. So in 2013, I was invited to come teach with a group called the Jerusalem Studio School that was run by Israel Hirschberg. And they have a summer program in Civita Castellana, Italy. And Civita is just a spectacular town with these gorgeous views. It's about an hour north of Rome. And although it wasn't my first experience in Italy, it has been the most formative time for me. I'm really grateful to Israel and his family for the invitation. And over the years, I have brought, I went as a resident, and then there were 3 years where I brought a group of students over. The landscape there has a long history, and probably one of the most important residents of Civita Castellana was Corot. You can see this is Monserrate, the same view. There's a little fort there. I'm painting from the other side of the fort. This is my view. It's just so much fun. This is 1826, and this is 2015, something like that. It's just the continuity of painting that you feel when you're in Italy. You feel that you are in the spots, in these places where where painting was really born. And Corot must have felt that too. That's why he, a Frenchman, was going down to Italy. They were doing what was called the Grand Tour, and this was one of the stops for a lot of artists. Corot was there, and a whole bunch of different painters stayed there. During their time, they were staying there because it was relatively cheap. That building that I'm calling the fort was at the time a prison, and so there weren't. People didn't really want to go there. It was a prison town, but it was inexpensive, and they could make the landscapes. Here's the other side of town. That same atmospheric color that was so important to me when I was here in Kutztown was also a major component of what was happening in Italy. And what I was seeing while I was there was a relationship between the kind of pearly color, atmosphere that's happening, and a relationship to the fresco and to the color in the air and the color of the buildings, and this connectedness that made a lot of sense to me. In Italy, there's just a never-ending things to see. This is a small piece of probably what is my favorite painting out there. This is the garden scene that was at Villa La Via. This was a subterranean room. So if any of you have ever gotten a chance to see this, it's in Rome at the Palazzo Massimo. I think it's the National Museum of Rome. And you walk in one side, and it's just 360 degrees all the way around of this just gorgeous garden scene. This was painted sometime in the 1st century BC, and the color is just extraordinary. And they have this lighting system, which is just a dream for a painter. It cycles through a natural light, warm light, and then cool light. So if you stay in the room long enough, you see this fresco in it looks like it's moving with the light, and it's just the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen. So this is one of the kind of life moments that I have keep going back to as far as something of a painting goal. I don't know how else to say that. There's a book, and I think Mark Rousseau's going to talk about it. It's called The Gift, and there's a few different concepts. It was written by Lewis Hyde. There's a few different concepts in this book, but one of the things that I got from it that I think is really important is the idea that the things you make are really a gift to other people, right? And if it doesn't feel that way, you should go stand either here or even like stand in front of one of Monet's waterlily paintings and look at the other people who come in and out there. They're getting a lot from that experience. Even people who aren't painters or don't know anything about that, they're getting a gift from that. And so it's a way of thinking about art that has changed my perspective a little bit over the years. So here's this is Piero della Francesco's Legend of the True Cross. It's in Arezzo. It is also just a life-changing experience to stand there and see this. But again, the color palette, the calmness, the skill, everything about this is just mind-blowing. And so when I came home, it did change the way I work, and I was really after much more of this pale fresco kind of feel to my paintings, and everything that I made for a couple of years afterwards I was trying to create some of that luminous feel that I saw in the garden painting, but also in Piero's frescoes. This is a traditional landscape near Emilia in this is Umbria. And back home again, I'm trying to, going back to my small patch of woods. I hope you all can visit me someday. You can see my small patch of woods. It's not very impressive. This is a white walnut tree that I began painting and realized that it was dying as I was painting it. But this is very accessible. This is a kind of view from the driveway. These wonderful little blue flowers come up. But again, that experience in Italy really informed the way I painted from then on. And this became another one of those subjects that I could return to again and again. This is the beginning of what I would say is the kind of new ideas of abstraction. So this is where the kind of abstract reality part of the talk comes in. Again, obviously I'm thinking about those Piero paintings, and I'm thinking about those frescoes. And in Rochester, the summers are gorgeous. The winters are awful, and it goes on forever, and it is just gray and terrible. But I have a wonderful studio, and so I go in and I use the time to really work out ideas and let things move in whatever direction that they need to move in. I had a series of big canvases stretched, and I would just paint and repaint them. This is another one that is too heavy to pick up, but it was the canvas that I could just keep coming back to, and it was like the vessel for me. I thought I could make, I still think I can make someday a painting that is not only about the experience, but feels a little bit like the experience. So I had a really wonderful morning in this garden in Siena with my wife and my daughter, kind of running through the paths. And I thought, that experience, I felt like I could still close my eyes and see that happening. And so what I would do is I'd spend, a good bit of time mixing color on my palette where each one of the colors had a very specific point of reference for me from that memory. And then sort of apply them to the canvas in such a way that maybe I was losing some of the form, but hopefully keeping some of that feeling of the experience, and more hopefully yet, creating something new. It's really hard to explain the level of doubt and uncertainty that I have and certainly had at this point. I was looking at other painters and trying to figure out what they did and why I was attracted to their work and how they solved some of these same problems I did. So this is a Bryce Marden painting. I like a lot of his work. And one of the things that I think is really that I took from him is that he was able to use his experiences as just sort of a poetic jumping off point. And they could influence the way that he made the painting, but that they didn't dictate it. Another artist is, of course, Richard Diebenkorn. Diebenkorn made this series of Ocean Park paintings, And the colors came from his environment, from Ocean Park, California. But the structure of the painting is all his. The form of the painting is in these geometric shapes. So I was interested in here. Here was another example of somebody who was making abstraction out of direct experience. Of course, Joan Mitchell is another great example. Her color is more expressive and often moves beyond the visual experience. Like I feel like these are pretty accurate to the colors of Ocean Park, California. I think this is maybe a step further for what was happening for her in France. But the expressive quality of them is there, and it's impressive. Howard Hodgkin is another painter I was looking at to try to think about mark making. Hodgkin's just a spectacular emotive painter. He can make these shapes and these colors speak in ways that are truly beyond me. This is called Rain in Rutland Gate. But if you ever get the opportunity to look up his portraits, he makes paintings that look very similar to this, but they're portraits of friends of his. And so they're people he knows very well. And so he uses the color and the mark and this kind of compositions to emote the feelings of that person. It's a fascinating idea. Not my favorite painting in the world, but it's one that has been a really important touchstone for me. This is by Joseph Stella, and this little patch on the right hand side is a detail. This painting hangs in the Met, and it took me a long time to realize what I liked so much about this, and it was the way that the colors really react in a natural way, as if they're being. As if there's almost like a flashlight shined on this part of the painting, and their activity of this color is just spectacular, and yet it references just about nothing. I can't make out what that is. If you guys see an animal in there or something, let me know. But I think it's a complete abstract joy. This little piece of painting. I was talking the other night about how you never know where you're going to find that little nugget of information that you can take and will become important to you. And this little piece of painting is something that I can go back to remind myself of what was interesting to me. This is one of Monet's later garden paintings that I was lucky enough to see just before the pandemic. I was in Paris, and this painting, along with other ones, were just mind blowing. So in my studio, what I was trying to do is still focus on those color relationships that I was getting in nature, but to try to dissolve the landscape, try to make it into something that a viewer or myself would first approach the painting for its physical terms. This is a very large painting. It's about 90 inches square. And one of the things that I found is the same thing with the abstract expressionists discovered, that size really does matter in this sense, and that you really do. It's important to feel, for me at least, to feel enveloped by the painting. I was experimenting with the size of the mark. Was looking for something that was big enough that it wasn't going to appear to be just a point of color and that would get optically mixed. I wanted something that was small enough that wasn't a shape in itself as a color field. And so the marks had seemed to develop a relationship to this, a proportional relationship to the size of the canvas. This is another point along the way where I hit on something and stumbled, really. It didn't I see now, I look at this painting and I think I was on the right path. I was on the path I needed to be, but I diverged. I went off in other directions. I really wanted where this other painting had this kind of ochre feel. I wanted this big blue painting. And it has, I think for me, psychologically, it has a lot to do with winter in Rochester. I want something that feels like a rainforest. You know, when I look at it, it's hard to explain how long winter is. This painting was made again. I'm trying to in my studio now. One of the things that has happened is I'm not drawing as much as I used to. I'm finding difficulty finding form in drawing, where before I could draw a landscape, I could draw figures, I could draw lots of things, but I had trouble drawing this. I had trouble drawing colors in space. And so what I wound up finding is that I was writing a lot more. I was taking notes all the time, and I would sit in my chair, and instead of drawing while I looked at the painting, I was writing through the ideas of form and how this was going to actually resolve itself someday. So one of the things that was still very important was that connection to idea, that connection to memory. I kept going back to those Italy experiences that were so still vivid in my head. This is a manifestation of one of the Umbrian hill towns. So that you'll see this like gorgeous buildings made out of tufa rock that are up on the cliff. And this painting felt a lot like that to me. The studio, boy, it got very speckly for a while. These paintings, again, it was like there's like day after day I leave the studio feeling like, boy, I'm on the right path. I'm on the right path. Everything feels good. I'm getting somewhere I need to be. And then for whatever reason, the bottom falls out of that, and I feel like there's like I'm not on firm ground anymore. And this happened a few years ago. This is what the studio looked like in the springtime when the leaves started coming out, and I was very unsure of what I was doing. I felt like I had lost something really big by leaving the landscape. And I think what was happening was the certainty of the landscape and the forms that were in the landscape were very comforting and were very kind of easy to hold on to in a way. And so this is another situation where I was taking steps forward and then I needed to take some steps back. So I backtracked and I spent the whole summer making paintings in the forest again. The forest, I felt like, was naturally doing some of the things that I was trying to do with the abstract spots of color, where I really enjoyed seeing these colors floating essentially in space. And when you go into the forest, you'll see a little ray of light will hit a branch. It appears to be floating in space, and so it had a lot of that same structure that I was looking for. It's another one. I'm someone who kind of constantly working to find the next path forward. I'm not the type of person who makes a plan and then executes something. So it's much more of a daily practice that I think will lead me down some path. The bathers came back, and I was again working with those places that I knew very well and the things that I knew how to do. And one of the reasons I think I was doing that is to really identify again the things that I wasn't willing to leave behind. And so those things really seem to include this very specific color that comes from observation and the sensual experiences that I have with nature. By the end of the summer, I'm trying to force the landscape in front of me to kind of cooperate with the abstraction and where I had gotten to with the abstraction. So what you're seeing in this painting is me really pushing the color a little bit, but also but also trying to break it into these spots that I can kind of control in space. That experience with taking abstraction so far and then leaving it for a while and coming back, I think was very difficult to do, but it felt like a necessary step. And I can't really describe it any other way. I think maybe if there was somebody there to say, "Oh, just stop it. Like, you don't need to do that. Just stay focused." Like, maybe I wouldn't have done that. But I think all of the students here will find experiences or years in your life where you're working really alone. There's nobody else around to talk to you about this stuff. And so you either have to go seek out a community that can help you with this, or you've got to go through all of the steps yourself, or who knows what. It's difficult. So I have returned to something of this abstraction based on nature. And one of the things that I am dealing with to this day, and we're getting now up to things that are much more current. This is pretty much everything I'll show you now has happened within the past 6 months. What I'm dealing with now is how much to control the forms that appear in my painting. I think I can make something that's based on observational color, but that doesn't immediately speak to form. Here is an example this is a fragment of a painting where I start to feel a form emerging here. Yeah, I start to feel sort of a roundness of almost like a figure in the landscape happening here. And it's the kind of thing that I'm not sure what to do with yet. I fight against it to some degree because I don't want to fall right back into this like structured landscape. So I was looking for solutions. I was looking for ways to almost like create my own form. Like, so Bryce Martin is using these kind of ribbons in a very shallow space. Richard Diebenkorn is doing this very geometric composition, all with that same color. And you'll see there's a whole series of painters out there who are doing blocks of color or flat patches of color. And in some ways, what that is that's saying this is my form, and I'm owning this. And that's where my work is going to sit. I had a more than brief time where I felt like if I applied some sort of logic to the way I put these spots on the canvas, that would help solve this problem. You can see the it's more than a hint, but you can see the concentric circles happening here. Boy, when I came home from the studio that day, I thought I was just brilliant. I pinned a little string to the bottom of the canvas, that I would wrap around the brush, and so it made it. You could put it anywhere. You could make these. It just kind of controlled where the marks went, and it was like it was a new thing for me. I have come to realize that it just felt a little gimmicky. So what I have been looking for since then is what my natural mark is. If there is going to be an abstract form that comes out of it, I want it to feel really authentic, and I want it to be mine. That concentric circle string thing didn't feel authentic. It felt like some sort of a trope that I made up to solve a problem. So it has to, if forms start to reemerge in my painting, I want them to be really authentic. The one thing that does seem to happen quite often is this vertical, almost like a falling of marks in space. This one's based on the colors on my patio in the summertime. This is based on, again, olive groves in Italy. And this is a larger painting that really explores again, like these very specific memories that I can go back to of a time and place. And every time I worked on the painting, it was again this ritual of mixing maybe 20 or 30 different colors that really were significant to me and really recalled this experience. And then when the painting starts, the colors interact with each other. So there's this kind of jumping off point. There's this experiential connection for me. And then there's this truth of the painting. There's that abstract reality that comes into play, where the painting grows based on what feels right. You know, how you place a color somewhere and it feels like, oh, too dark, too light, too red, too whatever, and you respond to that. And that is the amorphic process of making the paintings in the studio. This piece is really sort of separating the color more. So hopefully you would see in person a little kind of more space around each one of these spots of color. So they float a bit more. These are all about 6 feet across. And now we're getting up to this moment. This is my patio. Now that it's summertime again, I've returned. I feel confident enough with where I am with the abstraction to let that plein air experience back in. So last year, this time, I was on shaky ground and went back to making representational landscapes. This year, I feel really firm about what I'm doing and feel confident enough that I can get back to that experience of mixing color directly from nature and not necessarily making something that looks like a depiction of it. I've returned to the pond too, with a much larger canvases. So this piece, really kind of looks a lot like a pond painting in here, but it's grown since then. This is my friend Jason's cabin. I just nailed the painting to it. And this is what's happening in the studio right now. I'm working with 2 canvases. You can see the dividing line there. I'll let Joan Mitchell. Thank you, Joan Mitchell. There's a couple different reasons for that. I've over the years tried to combine canvases, and it always the line down the middle bothers me to no end. But this work, I feel like I can work them side to side and then work them together. And because I'm seeing the painting for its abstract terms, it doesn't bother me anymore. It's something that I feel like I can deal with that physicality of that line. And on very practical terms, I can move them around easier. Each side is 72 by 60, so it gets to be kind of quite large. And at that scale, it just gets troublesome to move. That is the last slide.
Okay, so this is coming from St. Helene. How is the square important to you? Is it related to geometry?
It is. It is related to geometry. This typically, you have vertical or portrait format, and then the landscape format feels, the horizontal feels much more cinematic. Maybe like things sort of appear to move more in the landscape format. Or particularly earlier on, you saw a lot of the pond paintings and the earlier Balthus influenced paintings were many of them were square. And one of the things I like about the square is the stillness of it, and the almost like the compromise between looking for objects like you do in a still life painting and the horizontal of the landscape. And so I thought that it also, really, yeah, it was about the stillness of the square.
Okay, I have another one here from Corinne. Are you pre-mixing your colors and sticking with that palette or changing as you go?
Well, I mix colors every time I start. So, but maybe this will help answer the question. every time I start a painting, whether it's a traditional plein air or the abstractions in the studio, there's a period, and it can be an hour or two where I'm just mixing colors. Out in nature, it's me kind of trying to match what I see to what exists out there. And I don't feel like I can really start the painting until I've solved a lot of the kind of color relationship issues that I have on my palette.
So I was wondering if you could explain or touch on more how you experience your religious painting as, I think you put it, a move beyond a visual experience.
How I think painting moves beyond the visual experience?
Yeah.
So for me, I think, when it comes to putting together a slideshow with the work, it does feel like it's been sanitized in a way, right? It feels like, I made this chronology out of it. I've tried to make it make sense. I've tried to talk about it. But the actual process of making a painting, when things are going well, is this, it's much more of an emotional reaction to the environment or to the experience of it. I think I can lose some of that in a talk. I think that gets sort of beaten out of it sometimes. And I think it's also, I think sometimes paintings that maybe appear too realistic also start feeling like maybe less emotion is involved anywhere, that they feel like kind of too much careful work, and that can be true. I think the works move in different directions, and every painting has a different, there's a different experience that's associated with making that painting. There are things that come from a quick interaction, a quick sort of plein air painting, or a 20 minutes in front of a model or something like that. That's very different than the process of working with a painting over a period of years. And so the experience that I have as an artist in relationship to that artwork is pretty broad. I'm not approaching the canvas the same way every time, and I'm not trying. Like I'm not trying to get like one thing out of it. I'm not trying to get like just one emotion onto it. You know what I mean? So it's hard to see. It's hard to sort of understand where the core of things are. The process of making the abstractions and the potential that's there for the abstraction feels like it can get into a territory that's much more personal. And the reason that I feel that way is that it's not dictated by the way, by constructing a landscape that's going to make sense to anyone else. So the color and my personal reactions to the painting can feel very individual. And it feels like an experience that I'm not sharing with somebody else. In a different way than when I make a landscape painting, it feels like I'm sharing that experience. It's an experience that we've all had standing on the mountaintop or something, and I'm making a painting that we're all going to be able to, relate to. Whereas the abstraction, it could come from a very personal experience of mine, but I fully recognize and fully embrace that somebody else is going to come to that painting with a completely different set of reactions and ideas, and that's part of the joy of it, I think.
Yeah, thanks so much. I love this discussion. I will put the down. I really like your discussion as you're going through these different evolutions, which were not necessarily sequential.
Right.
I'm also thinking sort of that. I love your discussion about it. What do you hold on to and what do you let go of?
Right.
And I could see in the earlier evolutions you kept returning to that atmospheric sort of pearly chalkiness of the frescoes, etc. But you've let go of the form for sure, but you say you're still working with the color from nature in some ways. You're trying to think of the experience how you experience those colors in nature, but in this feeling way rather than this seeing way. But I wanted to ask you, what about that atmospheric aspect? Because I don't see, like in this, that depth
Yeah.
that you were so holding on to in your other iterations. Do you think it's something you would return to?
I think one of the things that happens is that I think that right now, you know, this painting in particular came out of that changes that happens in the forest in the springtime, you know, and the gardens around the house and things like that. And so for me, it doesn't have that. It's not about that deep space of the landscape the way that an earlier piece. There's a painting called Arriving at Matilda's. We stayed at this in Matilda's house, and it was just spectacular. But one of the components of that experience was this big sweeping landscape. And so in that painting, when I was working on it, I was recalling not just the experience of standing there, but also the way that looked. You know, the way those colors look. And there's something that I think is something that I'm working and thinking about right now is the difference between remembered color and perceived color. And so throughout the winter, my palette changes quite a bit. And I think there's like a real desire, for whatever reason, I've got this real desire for those strong blues and greens throughout the winter. It's almost like, you know, if you haven't had vegetables in a while, you kind of want, you know, your body wants it. And I think that really kind of tips my memory in that direction. And then, so one of the things that I'm working with now, when I'm taking these paintings in front of the subject, I'm really loving that experience of perceptually mixing colors and working with what I get. The challenge is to build the painting and have some control over whether or not it really starts to resemble the forms that are in front of me. You know, and so part of that for me is giving myself the freedom to move things around, even when I'm in front of the landscape. So for instance, in my patio right now, there's this kind of beautiful color that happens underneath a white wicker chair on a terracotta patio. There's this amazing colors going on there, and my instinct is to put them down there, you know, in the painting. And yet, the experience of looking at those colors, the experience of that, is more important to me. And I'm really trying to work on being able to elevate those colors to be a stronger element in this new abstraction. And part of it is me just having old habits, and it's very easy to kind of fall into back into old habits.
How does your art fit into your life? How does your life fit?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. This is really important. This is the shout out to my wife, who is a wonderful person and who has we've been together now, like just 2 days ago, with our 18th wedding anniversary. And we were together quite a while before that. She's a very supportive person and has helped, you know, keep our lifestyle going so that I can paint on a regular basis. We have one daughter, so it's a kind of a manageable family size. And most of my time is broken up throughout the day, where I will spend maybe 3 or 4 hours in the studio or 3 or 4 hours out painting, and the rest of it is doing other things. Earlier on, I did a lot more teaching, but again, that was only a couple days a week. Maybe that was brief. Before that, I did art installation and hanging jobs. I did art moving, shipping jobs. I did all that sort of stuff to make money, you know. But always with the idea of carving out some time during the day to work. And I think the painters that I've known, really admired, have
have gone to the studio or gone outdoors or whatever, almost in a habitual way that builds over time. You make a kind of a you finish the paintings you start, I guess is the best way to put it. So I think the more things you start, it starts to accumulate over time. So I'm always looking for like another minute back in the studio or another time to work on this. Does that answer your question?
So you're more usually focusing on the experience.
So one of the issues that I ran into with the Bather paintings is they were always different than, obviously I was not setting, bringing models and friends out into nature, and setting everybody up. This wasn't like an experience I encountered. This isn't something I do on a daily basis or anything. But it was really more about the kind of overall sensual experience of seeing the Bather paintings that mattered to me. It was a subject that I was so familiar with that I reached a point where I realized I wasn't necessarily saying things I wanted to be saying with those paintings. I realized I was making something that most people were seeing and reading kind of literally, that because of the realism that was involved, I think I wasn't saying enough about the emotional experience of it. And I think that's one of the things that has drawn me more to the abstraction, because I never wanted to make literal paintings about the nude in nature. That was not the goal. And sometimes I think it's one of the hardest things to do is to look at your own work and to say, like, what does this really look like to other people? How is it really perceived? And that's a difficult thing to do.
We have a question online from former student, Liam Murphy Flores is asking, I'm curious about the shift in the space. In the early work in Italian paintings, they were broad.
Okay. That happened when I moved to Rochester. That was the big shift. The landscapes that I was using and returning to again and again when I lived here in Pennsylvania had much more of a larger view. They were very horizon heavy. They had that experience. But when you drive around Berks County and gets down out here at Lancaster, you get that experience. Here, Mount Gretna is much more like where I live now, where it's a forested environment. And I think maybe it was subconscious, but that's where that shift in the work comes from.
That's good. All right, thank you.